thought that we would have this going to turn out. And we are recording on the Zoom call. Do we have some folks on Zoom? We've got a few, good. Thank you all for coming tonight. This is a great turnout. If we weren't here, there's no place else in the Glacier Fire District to have this. And so it really was nice of the University of Denver, the New Mountain campus here to allow us to do that. John Parker, who is the site manager here, who was the site manager for the Girl Scout camp as well, isn't able to be with us tonight, but if you see him around or anybody else associated with the, thank him for letting us come up here tonight. My understanding is that they're going to start using this sometime in the not too distant future. They're going to put some improvements, I think, into some of the residential buildings that are behind here. And I know they're going to pave the road coming in. So they're going to be doing some cool stuff up here. So they're going to be a great addition to our community. Anyway, so how do we get to where we are today? We've had the Community Wildfire Protection Plan project on our work plan for a number of years. Probably, I think, back maybe 15 or 16, but really never got around to it. And then we had Community Peak Fire, which we all remember. And I think that got all of our attention. That we really need to be looking at wildland fire a little bit differently than we've looked at in the past. We received about $40,000 in contributions after the County Peak Fire and the fire district. People were very generous. We got similar after the High Park Fire as well. So our board of directors authorized this project, and they used a portion of the funds that were contributed to this project. So this project is funded by donations from many people in the district or outside of the district, kind of after the County Peak Fire. Again, I don't want to take really up any more time. I want to turn it over to Karina and Kristen from the Ember Alliance. They've been working with us for the last year, and we're about 2 months out from having the final plan. So I know Gordon is here from our board. He's here somewhere. Our fire chief, Dan Knox, is in the back here. He's our new fire chief. He's been serving.
And this is about fire, right?
And Steve over here, who's coming on our board of directors in May. And we have several of our members here. So thank you all Glacier members that are here and help us move into chairs because we got such a great crowd. And we have a number of other people here that are going to speak tonight or be able to address questions. And I'll let them introduce themselves when they get the time so we can get going right ahead with the program. So with that.
That sounds great. Thanks, Warren. And I just want to highlight, that these partners are here from the Forest Service, from the State Forest Service, from the the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, Larimer Conservation District, Larimer Conservation Corps, Larimer County Conservation Corps. Who am I missing over there? Did I get everyone? Oh, and the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. Thank you. So I was going to have everyone introduce themselves, but I think it makes more sense, Warren. It's a good suggestion to, when we come up to the front, we'll have everyone introduce themselves and their role. So I'm going to pass it to Kristen to give you a little overview of fire adapted communities and CWPPs. All right. Thank you all again. My name is Kristen Leger. I am a project coordinator with the Ember Alliance. So as Warren said, we have been contracted to write the CWPP, and we've been working on it with the Fire Protection District for about the past year now. So we are going to present lots of things to you tonight. But before we get into too much detail about the results of the CWPP, I wanted to present this concept of fire adapted communities to you all, which really just means being a community that is prepared for wildfire and has a resilient forest landscape surrounding it. There are several different components to becoming a fire adapted community. Having a community wildfire protection plan is certainly one really important action that you can take, but there's tons of other things involved in this. So fire adapted communities is kind of this umbrella term that we use to frame actions such as writing a CWPP, becoming a designated fire-wise community, which you all are, which is great, and then kind of bolstering some different educational community programs around helping to educate people around wildfire preparedness and safety. So some of you might be wondering what actually is a Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or as we keep calling it, a CWPP. So the National Wildfire Coordinating Group defines a CWPP as a planning document that identifies and prioritizes areas for hazardous school reduction and recommends the types and methods of treatment that will protect an at-risk community and its infrastructure. So you all know that you are in a community that has been prone to wildfires coming through. You've experienced this many times in the past. So having a CWPP in your community is really important, and it will help you kind of achieve that level of becoming a fire adapted community. So CWPPs exist all across the country. Oops. CWPPs exist all across the country, and each state kind of has its own set of standards for what needs to be in a CWPP. And in Colorado, the Colorado State Forest Service, which we have Max Erickson here tonight from the Colorado State Forest Service, they're kind of the regulating agency and the ones in Colorado who set the standards for what should be in a CWPP and ultimately approve each CWPP in the state. So in Colorado, there's over 250 communities that have community wildfire protection plans. This map is only showing the ones that our organization, the Ember Alliance, has worked on. So I wanted to highlight a couple here. You'll see that in Larimer County, obviously we're working on one in the Glacier Fire Protection District with you all. And we also recently started a CWPP with the Crystal Lakes Fire Protection District. And this is going to be a really neat opportunity for you all to partner with a neighboring fire protection district, try to pool resources and kind of tackle your implementation plan together. So based on the standards and the requirements that are set by the Colorado State Forest Service for what needs to be in a community wildfire protection plan, we have kind of developed this process for how we go about developing these plans. And it includes 5 major steps. So the first one is data gathering. So this entails working with the local fire protection district and other key stakeholders to acquire all relevant data that we need to conduct our analyses. Then that brings us into the next step of the process, which is actually conducting these analyses. These include fire behavior modeling, structure loss modeling, evacuation modeling, roadway survivability, and values at risk assessment. So after we do all those analyses, we move into our prioritization step. And in this flow chart, the prioritization refers to what we call prioritization framework. And during this step, we work again with the fire protection district and with key stakeholders to decide how we want to go about identifying priority areas in the community that we want to dedicate resources for to try to do some treatments. So in your fire protection district, life safety held the most weight when we were determining these priority areas. And that came from values that were reflected from the fire protection district and all of these other stakeholders that we engaged with during the process. So finally, we get to the results, which is what we're going to go over with you later in this presentation. So kind of the bread and butter of a CWPP is these 3 priority maps that we come up with. So we have priority landscapes that we're able to identify, priority neighborhoods, and priority roadways. And from these priority maps, we are then able to provide recommendations in the CWPP document, which are recommendations for actions that community members and the fire protection district and relevant stakeholders in the region should take to mitigate wildfire risk. And I do want to emphasize here that the CWPP is a document. It will provide recommendations to you all on how to mitigate your risk, but it's really going to be your responsibility as community members to take action on these recommendations to actually mitigate your risk. So, oops. I wanted to share this map with you. You may not all be familiar with the boundary of Glacier View Fire Protection District, and I would be very interested if you were familiar with it. So you can see the black outline on this map here. It shows the boundary of Glacier View Fire Protection District. So we understand that there are several different subdivisions and kind of sub-communities within Glacier View Fire Protection District. You don't all identify as being from Glacier View because there are these subdivisions in the middle called the Glacier View Meadows subdivisions. So I just really wanted to make it clear that when we talk about Glacier View Fire Protection District, we're talking about this entire area that includes all of these subdivisions listed on this slide here. And kind of the different colored polygons on this map is just a way that we broke up the community or the fire protection district to do some of our assessments. So we worked with Warren to delineate these boundaries and say, okay, people that live in the North Rim Road area of the fire protection district kind of self-identify as being from that sub-community. So you will see this black boundary show up on all of the maps throughout the rest of the presentation. And I just wanted to make it clear that that is the area of our CWPP when we're talking about the Glacier View Fire Protection District. Okay, we'll pass it to Nina. Awesome, thanks everyone.
So I want to give you all a little bit of context about what we're talking about when we're saying we're doing these analyses and what does that mean. I'm not going to go into great detail, but we have a really talented team of wildfire risk analysts. Dr. Meg Matonis is here tonight, and if we have any follow-up additional questions about that analysis, she is here and we can talk more about that as we get into the questions portion of the evening. I wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction and way of thinking about what we're talking about when we're saying things like fire behavior modeling and looking at and analyzing the landscape. So when we're here in Glacier View, we have a lot of kind of variable fuel conditions or vegetation conditions. Fuel is when we're talking about vegetation for a wildfire. We're thinking about the different types of vegetation that exist in this community and how they might respond based on weather inputs, based on things like slope that affect fire behavior. And so you can see that there's a lot of different conditions present in Glacier View, including burn scars from the High Park. And we're able to take a look and understand how fire is likely to engage in those places, and therefore, where do we have the most risk in the district? And so what we're talking about is going from identifying risks on the landscape and then prioritizing which places, where are the risks that we want to prioritize? We can't tackle everything immediately, but we need to be able to put limited resources and time into the most important areas. So that's the process I'm going to describe here. And what we're talking about in terms of what to do, I want to just have us all think about this slide for a moment where we're talking about treatments. In some communities where we talk about doing field treatments and mitigating fire behavior risks, we are talking about thinning, removing vegetation, and creating a different set of forest conditions. And what we're actually really talking about here is creating an ecological condition in the forest that is resilient to fire. So when you do no management and you have very thick forested areas, it is what you see in the High Park Star where you have really nothing left. We want to get this community and all communities in this region to a place where if fire is to occur, the landscape is resilient. And that's what that right-hand column is showing, is that with some thinning that's happening, fire can move through the area and you still have trees, you still have vegetation, you have a ecologically healthy forest. Sometimes we get some pushback on that, but I think that this is really helpful. You don't want to be building your house back necessarily in a moonscape. We want to be reserving some of these trees on the landscape so that wildlife and people can all be enjoying them. So how do we prioritize where to do those ecological treatments and create healthy forests that are resilient to fire? And how do we think about that in the built environment where we all live? So as Kristen mentioned before, we have 3 types of priorities that we're focusing on. We're looking at the plan units, so that's the residential areas on that map that Kristen just shared. What's the risk to the built environment and how are we going to prioritize action in these neighborhood areas to reduce risk? The second here is the landscape stand scale fuel treatments, where we're thinking about on the landscape, where can we do bigger scale fuel treatments that are going to reduce risk for the whole community? And so the purpose of sharing those with you all especially is you all need to support that type of work, because as field treatments are done in your community, it makes everyone safer and the environment more resilient when fire does occur. And then the third type here, as Kristen mentioned, is roadway fuel treatments. The roads are a really important feature, not only for evacuation, but they can be a great tactical option in a particular wildfire scenario. So we're also focusing on fuel treatments along roadways. There are some roadways in Glacier View that are definitely in need of treatment, particularly where we have a lot of congestion, a lot of traffic that might be happening during an evacuation. Your major evacuation route here, 74E, is in really great shape and has a lot less vegetation than some of the other more internal roads. But these are the three things that I'm about to share with you. We're going to start at that stand scale, because I want you all to think at that big fire protection district scale first. Think about what can we support and how can we galvanize the community to support some of these treatments that larger land managers need to be thinking about. So I'm going to come over here to kind of point some things out to you all. That darkest color, and I'm hoping the color is showing up for you all right. The darkest color are our first priority treatments on the landscape. That's where we have the greatest amount of impact. If we treat in these areas, it's going to have the greatest amount of impact on life safety, and it's going to reduce risky fuels that are going to impact communities. That was what the priority was for this community. It was not, let's treat the riskiest fuels, period, but let's treat the riskiest fuels that are going to impact communities. And then the second is that lighter orange or maybe tan color in this light, and you probably can't see very well that third priority, but it is the lightest tan color. And so this is where we're talking about developing projects to reduce risk and do fuel treatment in these areas. You can notice that from that North Rim Road area up into the Glacier View Meadows subdivisions along 74E, we've got a really big chunk of first priority that even falls into residential areas. And so there's a lot of field treatment that needs to be done in that area, both by land managers and by residents in concert. You'll also notice in the Lady Moon area and the Girl Scout, or the, what are we calling that? Red Feather Highlands, thank you, area in the northwest corner of the district. We've got a lot of risk in that area as well, and it's going to be definitely having an impact on the communities that live there should wildfire pass through that area. So you can see how we can develop some projects out of this. Kristen will talk a little bit about implementation later, but this is what you all need to support and work on with the larger land managers in this region, and we can have them all up for questions in a little bit. So this is the roadways, and I'm hoping you all can see this as well. The first priority roadways are in red. That's probably the easiest for you all to see. Those are roadways that are based on evacuation congestion that's predicted by our modeling and by high loads of vegetation or fuel along roadways. So where we have predicted congestion during evacuation and a lot of vegetation, we really want to be able to make sure that those roads are in good condition, they have easy access, and we're not likely to experience a lot of fire behavior in a worst case scenario along those roadways. The second and third priorities, the second are in orange, the third in blue. Those are where we have lessening levels of evacuation congestion predicted, but however, we still have a lot of vegetation along those roadways that could be creating a roadway hazard. So when we think about these types of projects, some of these may fall more to communities than to those large land managers. And these are things that will make the community safer and can provide tactical options when we're talking about reducing risks along roadway features. And then the third, I'm going to bring this map up just so you all can have a refresher. These are the different plan units. This is the way we broke down the analyses that we did. When we're rating these communities, we're rating each of these based on their risk. So this is basically a way to say, what's the risk to the built environment? not just to the vegetation, not where's the most risky vegetation, but how does this exactly impact the built environment? And some of this is based upon neighborhood field surveys that the Ember Alliance conducted to take a look at hazards that are present here that we don't have data or information on, to try to figure out how does the built environment look? Or do we have a lot of cedar shake roofs in this community, or what type of access issues might we have? And so each community gets a risk rating, and that is here. So hopefully you all can see the color differentiation here. The darkest red is extreme. The plain old red is high and the orange is moderate. The communities that are extreme, if you can't see the color differentiation on this projector, are Lady Moon, Red Feather Highlands, North Rim, and Glacier View Meadows 2. So those are where we're saying there's a lot of home ignition zone hazards. The homes have a lot of risk factors. There's a lot of risky vegetation. There's suppression challenges, and there's evacuation hazards. So all of those come together to provide a rating for each community. And it's broken down into 4 categories, which I'll share in a moment. And these are all accompanied in the CWPP with a set of recommendations. So we'll describe what are the risks here, because risk and risk are not the same. There might be more evacuation and suppression hazards in one area and more home ignition zone hazards in another. And that's where we've broken some of this out and given you all some specific recommendations. Like Kristen was saying earlier, there is a responsibility that falls on everyone in this community, from the fire district to the partners to the residents, to kind of do your part in making sure we're reducing risk, because each individual action in isolation doesn't have as great of impact as it does when we're thinking at a bigger scale. I'll show you the next map that kind of breaks it down. I think it might be hard for you all to see, but this is just to illustrate the point that in some communities, like along 74E, what we're calling Glacier View Meadows 1, it has a lot of big home ignition zone hazards that we saw in our field tour. However, evacuation and suppression challenges, access in those areas is really pretty good. So that's where you can get a differentiation of what the different risks are to your community, and the CWPP will describe some of the actions that you can take to mitigate those specific risks. I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to talk a little bit about what to do about these priorities, and focusing on kind of those homeowner and resident specific recommendations.
All right, great. Thank you, Karina, for going over the prioritization process. So now we're going to talk about some of the implementation recommendations that we have come up with your fire protection district based on those prioritization results. So you saw this graphic before, here it is again. This is just kind of the different levels that we are going to break the recommendations up into. So kind of at the smallest scale, we're going to provide recommendations for individual homeowners and at the neighborhood scale. And then moving up from there, we're going to provide recommendations for what should be done on the landscape scale. So large landowners, or maybe private property owners that have a lot of acreage, kind of what they can do to mitigate risk on that larger scale. And then finally, some roadway fuel treatment recommendations, which is really just based on where do we need to be putting our resources, which roadways need the most work. So we're going to start at that first level. And we've referred to this term a lot tonight, the home ignition zone. If you have those handouts on your table, Max was putting those on all the tables for you. That goes into a lot of detail about the home ignition zone. That is a resource that the Colorado State Forest Service developed, and this same graphic appears in there as well. So basically the home ignition zone is the potential of the structure to ignite and the quality of defensible space around it. So it can be broken up into these 2 different areas, which are structural ignitability, which is the home itself, and then the defensible space around the home. And then defensible space can further be broken up into these 3 different zones as you move further and further away from the home. So zone 1 is that area in direct proximity around the home within 0 to 5 feet. And that's where we really want to take actions to prevent flames from coming into direct contact with the structure. So that can look like several different things, but some of the best and easiest actions that you can take right in that initial zone are just to clear out all of the vegetation that's right up against your home. So if you have tall grasses growing up against your home, it's great to mow those. If you have shrubs or big junipers growing up against your home, you should get rid of those. What we actually saw a good amount of in Glacier View, which is a great strategy, is just getting rid of vegetation altogether and replacing it with gravel, because gravel can't burn, and then maybe doing some xeriscaping in there as well. So there's going to be lots of information in the CWPP and in this home ignition zone guide about what you can do in these 3 different zones. I'm just going to provide a little bit of information here. So then moving away a little bit further from the home into zone 2, which is 5 to 30 feet from the home. This is where we want to give an approaching fire less fuel, which will help reduce fire intensity as it gets closer to your home. So again, in this area, we want to focus on mowing the grass, removing all hazardous fuels, and trying to get rid of those ladder fuels that has the potential to bring fire from the surface of the ground up into the tree canopies. That's what we don't want. So that's where you're going to start seeing maybe thinning out some trees, but having some taller old growth trees in that area. And then finally, moving into the 3rd zone, which is 30 to 100 feet away from the home. This is really where you're going to get into more of your ecologically managed forest. So if you remember that graphic that Karina shared at the very beginning, that's where we're thinking more about wildlife habitat, about creating a resilient forest. So you'll want to think about maintaining some forest diversity in these areas, but then clearing out, again, those hazardous ladder fuels and creating large openings, and then maybe having some clusters of trees. So again, there's lots of information kind of about how you can create these conditions in the CWPP. So this graphic shows the top 10 ways to protect your home from wildfire. So again, there's going to be tons of resources just like this in the CWPP, but I just wanted to point out a couple to you now. So this, when we're talking about the home ignition zone, these actions refer to that structural ignitability of the home itself. And some really easy, affordable options that you can all do here are things like cleaning the pine needles out of your gutters, keeping embers out of eaves and vents so you can cover those with mesh, and then removing, if you have wood piles stacked underneath your wooden decks, it's really good to move those farther away from the home. So through a lot of research that we've done and a lot of wildfires that have happened over the past years, we've learned that the primary cause of home loss is not actually the fire encroaching on the home itself, but it's embers that get traveled from the main fire and blown to the home. So the idea with protecting your home from wildfire here is just to get rid of any like gaps or opening that can be receptive to an ember. So this photo here shows a really good example of defensible space. My coworker and I took this as we were driving around the community doing our home hazard assessments. And you'll probably recognize this landscape. This photo was taken in Filing 12, or what we refer to as Glacier View Metals 3. And this area was burned during the High Park fire. And the last time we gave this presentation, Warren pointed out to us that the home on the left side of this photo survived the High Park fire, while the home on the right side did not. And that was due to the amount of defensible space that the home on the left had created. So when firefighters and first responders came, they were able to defend that home. So when we say defensible space, what we're really talking about is creating the potential for firefighters to come and defend your home. The home on the right did burn down and has since been rebuilt. And when they rebuilt it, they did a great job of implementing defensible space. And this photo also exemplifies this concept that we call linked defensible space. So once you get into that 3rd home ignition zone, that's like within 30 to 100 feet away from your home, that's when you really want to start working with your neighbors, and you can kind of increase it from just your individual home level up to the neighborhood level to make your community as a whole more resilient. So just one more example here of defensible space. This photo might be a little bit more representative of other areas of the district, because I know that last one didn't have very many trees and forested area. So I just wanted to point out that you can still have trees around your home and create defensible space. So In this photo, we have the home on the right, which has pretty good defensible space. And then we have the home on the left, which maybe you can see it, but it's pretty tucked away back in the trees there. So that home would probably want to do a little bit more mitigation, getting rid of some of those fuels that are right close around the home. But you can still definitely have trees around your home and have good defensible space. You just don't want trees like growing over, hanging over your roof and getting all those pine needles in the gutters and things like that. So a lot of questions that we get from community members when we do these presentations, and we actually received this question at the last meeting we did with some of you folks. So we wanted to include a slide in here about some slash management options that are available to you all. So people ask us, what do I do with all of this slash once I cut it? So first and foremost, the best thing that you can do with your slash is to burn it, because then you get rid of it once and for all. However, burning your slash might not always be the most appropriate option. If you live in an area that has high home density, where your homes are really close together and you don't have a lot of land in between, then pile burning is probably not a very good option for you. And we do, of course, want to make sure that if residents are using pile burning as an option, that they have the resources and training that they need to safely and effectively burn slash piles. So there are a lot of resources out there and information for how you can become more comfortable, more knowledgeable, and more experienced with slash pile burning. I did want to highlight one that the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control offers. It's called the Certified Burner Program. And that's a pretty inexpensive class. I believe it's $30 or $45 that you can sign up for online. But there are also other things that you can do to become more comfortable with that. Broadcast burning is the other option for using fire as a mitigation tool. This is usually not something that landowners are doing at the neighborhood level, but this is something that you'll see on larger properties that large land managers such as the U.S. Forest Service might use. And we're aware that in Glacier Fire Protection District, there are certain HOA restrictions, and certain areas of the district may or may not allow slash pile burning. So that's going to be dependent on where you're located in the district. And you can talk to your fire protection district for more specific information about that. So if you can't use pile burning as an option, there are still other options available for dealing with your slash, such as chipping or mastication, hauling your material away, or lopping and scattering. So lopping and scattering is just taking a pair of loppers and cutting some bushes and maybe limbing up some trees that are right around your home, and then kind of scattering that material away, farther away from your home into the forest, so that you don't have that buildup of fuel right around your home. And then for chipping or mastication, we've seen some pretty cool community programs in other communities that we've worked on CWPPs with, where community members have pooled resources to buy like a community chipper that they're then able to share. So there's going to be some recommendations for different options like that in the document, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of what some of those slash management options are for you all. So now kind of moving up to the next level, we talked about these roadway fuel treatments that are needed. I just wanted to provide an example of a roadway that is in desperate need of fuel treatment. So you can see that there's really dense forested fuels growing right up against this road. This is an example of a road where first responders or firefighters might drive there in the event of a wildfire and get there and say, no way, I'm not going up that road, it's not safe. So that's when it's really important to start mitigation along roadways such as these, so that they're safer for first responders to go protect your homes and for you all to be able to evacuate. On the other hand, this is an example of a pretty well mitigated roadway. You can see there's still some tall grasses on the side of the road that could be mowed, but overall the canopy fuels have been mitigated and thinned out. There's still some trees on the side of the road, but it's not going to create extremely hazardous conditions in the case of a wildfire. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is this idea of landscape scale fuel treatments. So I wanted to highlight some of the projects that are happening on this landscape. And I think that you all as a district are actually in a really strategic and kind of neat location, because all of these other projects are happening just west of your district. So you can see Glacier View Fire Protection District is on the right-hand side of this screen. And then overlaying that in yellow, if you can see, is the Delatour Scout Ranch, which has implemented tons of treatments in the past and are continuing to do so every year. The Ember Alliance has worked with them there, the Conservation District, several different nonprofit groups. And then the US Forest Service to the west of your district also has some large projects currently ongoing. So you all are in a really strategic position to be able to build off of those landscape scale treatments and kind of like use that as a starting point to create more and more resiliency and wildfire mitigation. So with that, I want to pass it to Bob Sturtevant, who is the conservation chair at the Delatour Scout Ranch, to share some success stories about some of the work that the ranch has done and how it has been really helpful when wildfires have come through. So I will give the mic and then just click this to the next slide. I just have a couple, yes, I just have a couple slides of photos.
Good evening. I'm Bob Sturtevant. I'm the conservation chair for the Delatour Scout Ranch. A position, volunteer position I've had for about 35 years. When I first got there to the Scout Ranch as a volunteer, I'm a forester. I worked at the State Forest Service for my career. Retired now, I'm teaching at CSU and Front Range. But when I first started up there as a volunteer, I looked around and I said, man, this place is going to burn. We got to do something about it. But their policy at that time was don't cut trees. Trees are beautiful. We love trees. I said, well, okay, but something's going to happen. Well, we didn't have a fire, but we had something almost as effective, and that was the mountain pine beetle. This is in the 80s, and they started building up in the 80s. And back then we had chemicals we could put on those trees. Once we cut them, we could spray them, it would kill the beetles. So I started taking trees down that were infested. And lo and behold, when those trees were taken out, it looked better. And they said, yeah, that's okay. Maybe we could take some more trees down. So I started on the west side of the property to create a fuel break. And thinned it out from below, took out a lot of those little trees, some of the big trees, spread them out. And what happened is the grass started coming back. And it started looking really nice. I said, that's pretty good. And I said, okay, can we do more? I said, okay. So I started doing cuts around the different infrastructure, the different camps, doing some fuel breaks around buildings. Those look good. I said, can we do something bigger? So they wanted to put in a new cub camp. And I said, can we just thin this whole area out before you put the camp in? They said, yeah, okay. We did that, and it looked great. And it was much easier to put those buildings in after the cutting than after, doing the cutting after the buildings were in. Well, it's expensive to do this kind of work, as you will find out. And it's a lot of work. What I had to work with as somebody associated with Colorado State University, which the State Forest Service is, I had students that I worked with. And they were the ones that were doing the work for me, for helping me do the work. You can get so much work out of students before they say that's a lot of work, and I'd rather do something else that would interfere. But we got started, and that got the momentum going. And as a forester, I knew there was money available from different places, and you'll hear more about that. We started getting some grants. I could hire people to do the work. Like Larimer County had a mitigation crew, and they would go out and work on private land. They worked on a lot of the property. They did a lot of the fuel break along the edges. That did a lot of work for us. Then this is, 80s and 90s. There wasn't a whole lot of fires going on, so there wasn't a lot of incentive. But around 2002, we had some major fires. The money started flowing and grants started flowing. And we do a lot more work. 2000, into the 2010s, more bigger fires, more money's flowing. High Park Fire, that got the people excited. The coalition for the Poudre River Watershed was formed. They wanted to start someplace to get something going. We said, hey, come to the state, come to the Scout Ranch, you can work there. Don't have to do NEPA, don't have to do a whole lot of planning. I was the guy in charge, I said, do it. And they did the plan for us, and they did the cutting using Larimer County conservation crews. They're still working on their property. Nature Conservancy was a big help. Now the Ember Alliance. So the yellow that goes up along 70 or 68C was all cut by the Ember Alliance last year. That's a new fuel break. So we have a fuel break all the way around almost. The blue you will all recognize as the elk fire. It was the elk prescribed fire that got a little close to you, maybe on some of your properties. But we burned that in 2019. What happened 2 years ago? Cameron Peak Fire. Cameron Peak Fire stopped right on the edge of our property, on that fuel break, where's that yellow. If it had gotten across that, went through our property, it would hit that prescribed fire and stopped. That prescribed fire protected your properties from the Cameron Peak Fire. And that's what our objective was. To not only protect our property, but protect the people to our east. So this is how we get it done. We have lots of volunteers. I have students still available. I work them hard. We get volunteers, wildlands restoration volunteers, Front Range Community College. But we also have four-legged volunteers. We graze our property so that it keeps the grass down. Grass is what really carries fire. I ran a class every spring, and they would get a certain piece of property on our camp, and they would create a management plan. They would mark the trees, cut the trees, skid the trees, and we get some work done that way. When we got some money from some of these grants, we could get people like Morgan Timber or some of the other timber companies come in and do the work for us and get the big machine for it, get more work done. That's how we're getting it done. Like I say, I've been doing it for 35 years. I'll probably do it until I'm dead. That could be next year for all I know, because it's a lot of work, but it's effective. And I think it's looking better every year. And hopefully you guys can get some of this done too, and some of the areas that are really thick on your property. And I'm available to talk to you about it. And I encourage you to cut some trees.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Bob. I hope you're not dead next year, because you're a really good partner, and we like working with you and all kinds of stuff like that. Thank you all for having us out tonight. I recognize some faces in here. I'm glad to see such a great turnout for this. My name is Daniel Bowker. I'm a forester with the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. I'm going to cover a good bit of the same ground as Bob did, and I'll show you a map and talk about some of those treatments and get into a little bit of what's available for the community like yours for doing these kind of treatments. So CPRW is a local nonprofit. We were formed after the High Park fire to do river restoration work, watershed restoration work, watershed resilience work, and then we got into forest health work as well, so wildfire mitigation, and that's my job with the coalition. We're currently doing a lot of work after both High Park and Cameron Peak fires. We were helping out with the area mulching. You'll probably saw the helicopters in the air last year, putting some of the mulch on the ground, doing some of those things to stop the erosion, but we also want to get ahead of wildfires before they happen. And that's what I'm supposed to do. This is the landscape that Bob was just showing you there. We've got a little pointer here. You can see the density. You guys recognize Glacier View right there. Whole lot of property lines, whole lot of small parcels. This big one, of course, here again is the Delatour Scout Ranch. And I'll just talk you through, you're not starting from scratch, right? And Bob was showing you a lot of that. I know a lot of you folks have already done work in your backyards. I know the Glacier View has already burned that big slash pile several times. So you're not starting from scratch. What we need to do, like Kristen was talking about, is think about this as a landscape and trying to do treatments at a landscape scale. So we don't just pick a spot and go out there and start cutting trees. We think about where fire's coming from. Of course, it's going to be coming from the west, right? There's Cameron Peak and how it got close and onto the Scout Ranch there, and it was coming at Glacier View a couple of years ago. So, you know, we think about those kind of things, fire coming out of the canyon, which way is it going to move? What are the fuel types, that kind of thing. What's the Forest Service doing? The big green agency in the room. And we've got James here, might be able to talk about some of their efforts in this area as well. And so we work together as a group called the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative, where we just did it recently for a grant application. We all get around the table, we look at big maps, we decide, hey, you know, there's a grant opportunity here, we can ask for $1 million. Where do we put that money for maximum benefit? So we don't spend 20 bucks over here and 15 over there, that kind of thing. We want to do it in a way that is going to be most useful. Thinking about fire behavior, fuel types, structures, all those values of the risk. And so that's what we started to do here along Elkhorn Creek back in about 2015. Bob showed you a bunch of the treatments that the Scout Ranch had already done over the years. And then in 2015, a group called the Elkhorn Creek Forest Health Initiative got together. That's my organization, CPRW, Larimer County Conservation Corps, Nature Conservancy, Wildlands Restoration Volunteers, Larimer Conservation District. All of us thinking about how to line these treatments up in a critical way to protect the community here, and also to protect water quality in Elkhorn Creek, which of course is a major tributary to the Poudre. If Elkhorn Creek burns hot, it's going to affect the Poudre River, right? And water quality and infrastructure and things like that there. So I won't spend too much time on this, but we've done all kinds of types of treatments. Bob was showing you some of the pictures of the different types. Done some mechanical treatments in there with feller bunchers and skidders. You can do those where you've got good access, where you don't have slopes that are too steep where the machines can't go. And Gretchen can tell you more about the Larimer Conservation District's program and how they use those big machines to really decrease forest density and increase things like wildlife habitat, understory diversity, those kinds of things to affect fire behavior as well. But then we've also done lots of different treatments in here, like broadcast prescribed fire. Bob mentioned the big one in 2019. There's the outline of that. There's also a smaller 150-acre one back in 2017, that you guys are probably aware of. We've done a bunch of hand thinning and slash pile burning. That's the tough stuff. That's where, you know, this north side of Elkhorn Creek, you guys have seen it, halfway up the ridge is Scout Ranch and the rest of it's Forest Service. What do you do in a spot like that? You got to get chainsaw crews in there. They're hiking in with saws, they're cutting trees, building those piles and burning those piles a year later to get those fuels off the landscape. There are trade-offs in some of this. To do those steeper slope treatments, you're not going to be able to take down a bunch of 12 and 14 inch trees. There's nothing to do with the wood. So, you know, there's some trade-offs in what you can do in certain places with the money you've got, the access you've got, the equipment you've got. But like I said, you're not starting from scratch. The Conservation District has done a lot of work that Gretchen can talk about over here on the Scout Ranch and over on Shenbottom Mountain Center. Of course, Cameron Peak Fire burned into some of that. A lot of work done on both sides of the creek. And then as this work progressed, people got interested. We do lots of tours. We show this stuff off. We get groups like yours out to see what these things actually look like on the ground. And because of that, we got interest from other landowners. Some folks up on Northram Road, right there. There's the switchbacks right there. And then some of these folks right here got interested. And we did a small mechanical treatment right there, and then some mastication and hand thinning and pile burning up on these properties. And so that's a start, you know, that deepens and maximizes the benefit of the treatments that are already done on the landscape there. Some of these folks down here, they're right outside the Glacier boundary, but they're also interested. And so you start lining up some treatments along this way. It's kind of like a catcher's net, right? You start lining up some of this stuff in a way that when a fire comes out of the canyon again someday, it has some kind of effect, positive effect on fire behavior and fuels for protecting community infrastructure, water quality, all those kinds of things. So that's the major take-home lesson from this. We're looking right now at doing some treatment on both federal and private land as it comes up the switchbacks. That picture that Kristen or Karina showed earlier of the road that looked really bad. I'm not sure if that was Northram, but Northram looks a lot like that. Okay, was it?
Yeah.
It's tight in there. It's scary. It's steep. There's a lot of fuel there. Firefighter is not going to be thrilled to have an engine up there. So doing something along the switchbacks on both sides of the fence would be a really good thing to do. A lot of the prioritization work that the Ember Alliance has done here shows the benefits of doing the treatments in this area that we're doing, as well as doing the work in your all's backyards, doing the work along the roadways, and doing the work in those other neighborhoods. I'll move on because I know I'm taking some time. Just quickly, you know, steep slopes, somebody's backyard, there's not a road there. What do you do in a spot like that? A lot of you folks probably had some properties that look like this. Those smaller trees are starting to grow in. If I were a fire, I would have killed all those little trees, right? But we've put out fire very effectively for over 100 years. Those little trees are turning into big trees. And now we've got a lot of the mid-age trees overrepresented on the landscape as well. Tough ground like that, what do? You get those chainsaw crews in. Yeah, there's just a little illustration of how many stumps. There's probably 50 stumps in this one picture there. So you get rid of those lighter fuels. You try to make it look more like this, build those piles. Get it? So, you know, sure, I'd love to take another third of these trees out of there, but I can't get a skidder in here to do it. So, you know, you do your best, you build those piles, come back a year later, you burn them, and then it's starting to look like something that a fire could burn through without jumping up into the canopy and killing all the trees. Quickly, you all have seen a lot of facts and figures and that kind of thing. We just wanted to show you for this thinning from below that I'm talking about, where you're taking those lighter fuels, piling them and burning. It is effective from a fire behavior standpoint. It's not as effective, again, those trade-offs, it's not as effective as bringing in the big equipment and getting it back way down in density, but it is effective in some ways. So that's a representation, some modeling software that the Forest Service has. That's what it looked like before, 357 trees per acre, and that's mild for some of the spots I've seen well over 1,000. You know, we got it down in these areas to about 111 trees per acre. That's a good improvement. Basal area, which is a representation of just surface area, basically of trees, went down to almost half. And so what that does, from a firefighting perspective, the flame length under severe conditions, if that burns, they're going to be 27-foot flames. Nobody's going to try to fight that fire. Absolutely not. 12-foot flames, still, you know, that's pretty dangerous, but it's way better than 27. Either way, it's going to torch under severe conditions. But under moderate conditions, it's not nearly as likely to torch, meaning bring that fire up into the canopy. And by doing these kind of treatments here, the crowning index, kind of a technical term, but basically under severe conditions, hot, dry, and windy, we have those days pretty frequently, these summers and sometimes springs and falls as well. Before thinning, it would have taken a 24-mile-an-hour wind to put that fire in the canopy and then make it move through the canopy, basically killing all the trees. After that thinning, it's going to take a 43-mile-per-hour wind. So some days you're going to get that, and maybe that doesn't hold up. If it's 80 degrees and you got 70-mile-an-hour gusts. But on a moderate day, if the fire starts, you got a much better chance. That's the basic idea. I'll leave it there, and we'll probably talk some more in a little bit. But thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming up and speaking and sharing a little bit about some successes on the landscape, giving some positive stories about what we can do. So I didn't mention at the beginning, I meant to, if you all need the restroom, you can go back through towards the left where you came from, and there is a family restroom. This used to be a Girl Scout camp. There's also a multiple stall women's restroom. We're going to have our partners come up to the front to talk about some of their available programs, some funding opportunities that could be relevant to you all. If you all need to get a drink, there is coffee and tea and some water over on the side here. So as the partners come up, I invite you all to get ready to hear about those programs. And if you need to use the facilities, please do. So at this point, I'm going to invite Larimer County Sheriff's Office, Colorado State Forest Service, Conservation District. You all know who you are. I think all the partners can come up at this point and share the programs that they have and what kind of work they do. And then when they talk about their program, I'll have you all stand up. You can even use the chairs. If you want to take a seat at the chairs, you can. And they're going to share who they represent and some programs that are available that they offer to you, or other types of work that they do that might be relevant to you all. So I'm going to go down to the end here and start with Max. And he's we're gonna go down the line and have you all introduce yourselves and then your programs as we go down the line. Sound good?
Great. Thank you, Karina. Good evening, everyone. I'm Max Erickson. I'm with Colorado State Forest Service. I work at our Fort Collins field office, so we have a lot of Larimer County here. Work with Glacier Fire Protection District, the Ember Alliance, and all these great partners here. So thank you for showing up too. This is really important. This is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So it is for you, written by you, and get some good work done. Briefly, I'll talk about a couple things that we have to help out with this. The first is the community, or the home ignition zone publication. You all should have some on your tables out there. If not, there's more on the table up front. We get some more. This is a really good publication. It talks about the home ignition zone and defensible space around there that Kristen was talking about earlier. Really useful as you, as a land or a homeowner, that you can take some actionable steps today. Maybe you probably have already, but you can reference this in the future as well. Another resource we have on our website, to go to our Fort Collins Fieldhouse webpage, we do have a local list of forestry contractors or loggers. These are folks who know in the area that do this type of work. Like Bob mentioned, it is hard to do, but there are a lot of people out there that can help do it. We don't recommend anybody here, but it's a really good list. You can start reaching out to folks, just like replacing your sink or something else like that. The last thing here is our forest restoration and wildfire risk mitigation grant. It's now full, but this is a grant that is meant for community-wide, fuels mitigation type of projects. This is one that we put out every year. It's a competitive grant, but a really key part of this is that it references your up-to-date community wildfire protection plan. So when you all have this written, you have some actionable steps, you can start looking at programs like this and some of our other partners who are on top of, this can help fund some of the costs there to get this work done. So I'll just plug quickly, our website has a lot of really good information as well, lots of great publications for you to read and anything forest management. And with that, I will pass on the mic. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Derek Rosenquist with Larimer County Sheriff's Office Emergency Services Unit. One of my jobs, I'm the wildfire safety coordinator for the county, so I get to help communities develop their CWPPs, provide some input from kind of the emergency response point of view and kind of that home ignition zone point of view. Part of my other job is responding to wildfires. So I get to work with Warren and Dan and all the other fire departments. And as part of that, I'm also the supervisor for Sheriff's Office Initial Attack Module. Right now, it's 6 people. We're constantly bugging the sheriff for more. With that, they have spent a lot of time with the natural resources, doing a lot of fuels mitigation on county-owned lands. And I'm slowly trying to hook them into helping communities do some work here and there with their CWPPs. We can't do the large projects, but hey, looking at some of these roadways, you know, we can get in there and at least start some stuff. We've been working with Glen Haven, with some of their things. Right now, the initial attack module, their primary job is wildfire firefighting. But when we can, it's kind of case by case basis. We're trying to get into communities like yours, working on that life safety ingress egress routes. Unfortunately, right now our capacity is small, but we can at least start some work here and there when, if we're not already committed to other projects. So I'm always looking for those opportunities, trying to plan things out, and maybe a couple years out, but we can at least try to get some stuff started. Again, trying to build, we have another 2020 season, we're gonna be on fires all the time, but kind of hoping for a slower season this year. Been kind of busy capacity. I also do, if you're building a new house or anything like that, you will probably see me. I do all the inspections for your constructions and short-term rentals. I just put a plug, short-term rental, if you're thinking about it, it's the same as new construction, which is following the guidelines for the home ignition zone that Max has pushed out. Set it down to 1 visit, call me when you're ready to go, and I can come up do 1 visit instead of 2. So, if you guys sometimes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gretchen Bruning. I'm with the Larimer Conservation District, and we, up until 2 months ago, were the Fort Collins Conservation District and the Big Thompson District. So we run from Wyoming state line all the way down to the border line. And we work with private landowners and private land managers. We work with Bob at Boy Scout Ranch, some other folks probably in this room right now. But we kind of work on that landscape scale that Daniel was mentioning earlier with the big heavy equipment. So the goal for our program is really to focus on the ecological restoration side of things. So not only fuel mitigation, but really focusing on wildlife habitat and just increasing the benefit for everyone and all of our resources across the landscape. So we do work with all types of different landowners. We have resources available across the board that include, technical assistance, if it's coming out for a site visit, helping folks understand, what their forest health issues are and what they can do to, move those in the right direction. We also offer technical assistance and financial assistance. So we have a program with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's a cost share program that individual landowners can apply for. It's called EQIP, or the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So that's been a really great avenue for getting a lot of these projects funded in the past, and something that you guys are more than welcome to talk to us more about. We have a team of 4 foresters in our Fort Collins field office. We're available to, if not come out and help you guys out, point you in the right direction for one of our partners that can help you out. And just parting thoughts is we're all really lucky to have all this engagement out here, not only with you guys, but we've got a lot of partners in your corner too. So don't hesitate to reach out to someone, and we can always point you in the right direction.
Good evening, James White with the U.S. Forest Service here locally, and so we don't necessarily have programs that directly can benefit you other than the opportunity to come help us plan our next project. And as one of the huge benefits that we have now with this group of folks is that we communicate regularly and look to strategize and leverage our resources. And one of one of our intentions has been over the last 5 years to really start supporting our partners, both financially and with the resources that the Forest Service brings to the table to get the larger project work done. I wanted to mention that in the past, the Forest Service has kind of gone to where there's lots of green, right? There's lots of contiguous Forest Service landscapes where we can do projects that are large in scale and can generally meet multiple objectives. We still intend to do that. However, we know, and through the work with our partners, recognize that we need to be up next to your back door if that's where the Forest Service landscape extends to. And we need to continue those landscapes, or excuse me, the treatment of that landscape all the way up through to zone 1 within 5 feet of the home. So, from the Forest Service perspective, I just want to put the plug out there that community engagement is critical, especially as we move forward and we're looking at working through a very, very large planning project where we have the flexibility to work right up and adjacent to any private land, in fact, any jurisdiction. And that our NEPA, which Bob had so eloquently pointed out, that we're not forced, we have the opportunity to engage in that would be clear, and gives us a lot more flexibility to treat in these areas that get identified in the CWPP. So, any questions you may have after this meeting, please, direct them to the Ember Alliance or, any of the partners, and we will share, and maybe we can share some contact information later or place some information on board. But it's really awesome. I've worked on this force for 25 years, and I've never seen this big of a turnout. So this is really, really encouraging. So thank you for showing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nally Rapesa. I'm the director of the Larimer County Conservation Board. Thanks for coming out this evening. We are a program underneath the county umbrella that runs seasonal programming for conservation-based projects with students. So we put a lot of the students to work coming out of CSU and Warner College in Front Range, put them out on projects, the best land conservation projects, like trail work or restoration work or bushfire restoration work, as well as forestry work specifically to you all. You've probably seen our crews running up and down the hills in the trailers and the vans. We spent a lot of time out in Delatour. We spent some time here doing fitting. And our crews offer an option as a partner within this bigger role of what we're talking about this evening, to look at how we can get some of this mitigation work done. Our hand crews will come out, spend weeks out on the property, fitting the forest, piling, and then moving on to the next property or the next public land. Over the years, we have seen an increase of partners like you on the private side, looking at how we can do this mitigation work, how we can do it collaboratively. So we are an option to look at how we can get some of that work done. Instrumental in partnering with CWPP as kind of the collaborator in the area. So we have opportunity, funding opportunities that you all can access creatively, looking at how you can get some of this work done in some of these small parcels. Addressing that funding. So if you have questions, we'll be around. Check our website. Yeah, thanks for being here. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Nally. You guys have already heard from me, so not talk too long, but again, Daniel Belker, CPRW. Yeah, I'll just echo what everybody said about such a great room. The fact that you guys are here and engaged and you were willing to go through the CWPP process and do the modeling and all that kind of thing is really important. And it's not meant to scare anybody with a bunch of red on the map. We all know there's risk here, but it's shared risk, and that's why we're all here. We all share the responsibility for addressing that risk. And I'll leave a bunch of cards on the table. We're a good CPRW. We're a good first stop. Give me a call. If there's something that's appropriate for one of these other folks, I'll pass it to them. They'll do the same for me. So we all work together in this collaborative, and we all look at the same maps, and we're thinking about the same landscape. And the landscape we're focusing on tonight is yours. And there's a lot of work to be done, but there are funding mechanisms. There are grants out there. You don't have to do them yourselves. You're welcome to do them yourselves, but we can also help with that. We can think through, the best funding source, where's that money going to come from? How do we put that stuff together? There's a lot to those creative funding for a lot of those projects. Sometimes you have to bring in one source of money from somewhere else and match it with another source of funding. And we've got a lot of experience doing that, so we're all a resource for that kind of thing to help you all get started in this process. So happy to take any questions and that kind of thing if we're at that point.
Yeah, we are at that point. So I'm going to invite another member from the Ember Alliance team to come up, Dr. Magnetonis, who did a lot of the wildfire behavior modeling for this project. And we're going to switch now to taking questions from you all. Warren Jones is going to come around with a mic. And I think maybe first he'll share a little bit about some of the fire district opportunities and next steps, but then we're going to be able to take questions from you all, and all these folks are going to stay up here and be able to answer any additional questions that you might have. We can talk CWPP, we can talk land management, we can talk education, whatever questions you got.
Sure. Thank you, Karina. I'll be Vanna White and we're going to turn the microphone around for questions. Looks like we've got about 45 minutes. Before we start that though, I want to tell you where we are in this process. We started this process with the CWPP, I think, late in 2000, I think is when we first started this project and really got it going in the spring of 2021, which is a year ago now. Our friends here at the Ember Alliance are working on the final document now. So some of the input that you provide tonight, some of the questions you ask, some of the input that you have given in previous meetings, because some of you have been to some of the previous meetings, as well as some of you have filled out our survey that we had from the fire district here a couple months ago. And there were questions specifically about wildfire and the CWPP process. A lot that you're hearing tonight from these folks is all about mitigation, fuel treatments, those kind of things. But that's not the only thing that we're going to be dealing with the CWPP. We're going to be dealing with education. We're going to be dealing with what kind of programs can we provide at the local level here within our district, within our community, to help you do the things that you need to do to keep your properties as safe as you can. So you're going to see that kind of stuff as well. Even though this mitigation and fuel treatments, that's the big overarching thing. But we've got other things. We want to make sure that people are signed up and know what happens with the notification system from Larimer County and Larimer Emergency Telephone Authority that provides all the notification systems. We have another group within our Glacier area called the North 40 Alliance that has done some work with some evacuation planning, mostly on the macro level. Once you get down to County Road 74, you go east or west and those kinds of things. So there's a lot of work going on. I expect that we're going to see the final report in draft form from the Ember Alliance in about a month. And then our technical team will look at that, and then we will have that with probably our board of directors in a public meeting, probably for the June meeting, which is the second Monday of June. So board members, you'll be expected to hear me talk a little bit more, because they'll actually have to formally adopt this plan. And some of these folks that are up here will be signatories to that plan to make it a legal document, because then when we go asking for money to do some of these projects, you have to have an approved CWPP that is also sanctioned by the State Forest Service, the Larimer County Sheriff, and all of our partners. So this is a big project. It's almost done. And again, if I don't get to speak again today, I want to make sure that on behalf of Glacier Fire District, our board of directors are here and all of our members, how appreciative we are for you to take 2 hours out of your night, walk the 100 yards up and 100 yards back. I was thinking I'll go out and get my pickup and we'll shine the headlights down the way to walk back. Somebody asked me why they don't have a parking lot here. I said, well, I thought about that too. But this used to be a Girl Scout camp. And they don't drive on Girl Scout camps, but when you're in camp, you walk everywhere, right? So that probably makes sense when you think about it. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. I'll bring the microphone around.
I was karaoke. Dan Barber, wearing two hats tonight, HOA board president for Glacier View and also the ecology chair. So I have two questions. The first one is you showed Ember Alliance working with Glacier View and Crystal Lakes. In between there is Red Bud. Do they have a CWPP? Are they working on one? Is there a negative impact to the two having that gap in between?
I am not sure if Glacier View or if Red Feather has a current CWPP. If they have done one, it is probably, there was a kind of initial round of CWPPs that was completed in around 2008 is usually when people did a first one. They may have one from that time period. I can't speak to that. I think so.
Yeah, they do.
One from 07, okay. But in terms of, is it negative that they don't have one in between? No. We'll still be coordinating and talking about risks to the Glacier View and the Crystal Lakes communities. I think there's a lot of ongoing connection between Glacier View, Red Feather, Crystal Lakes, Poudre Valley, and Livermore Fire. And so there is, I think, some ongoing conversations there. Of course, Red Feather wouldn't have the really specific community level recommendations. But as you can see on some of those maps, we're thinking at that landscape scale when we're identifying risk. And so we're trying to look at risks that are outside of the district boundary. So it shouldn't be necessarily a problem, but if they were to kind of also be in coordination and the three districts right in a row here, we're all coordinating and sharing and pooling resources, I think that would be wonderful. But I don't want to speak to the other districts, but I think the plan stands well on its own, and the more plans that are happening and the more fire mitigation that's happening at the regional scale, the better also.
Well, you did show some things that were going on outside of
Yeah.
the fire protection district. The second hat is the ecology chair. Ties back more to what the guy from Delatour was saying. When I came here in 2013, there was still a lot of the beetle kill and everything, and everybody was save the trees. And we got to kind of change that perspective a little bit. Is there any good ways to help this management of change for the actual residents? Because that's part of what is resistant. Is here I've been trying to save my beetle kill trees, and now you want me to put them out.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And that's something we experience in a lot of communities. I'm gonna say a couple things. I think some folks may have some ideas as well. But when we're talking about doing fire mitigation, we're actually really talking about kind of cutting trees to save trees. And that's kind of what we were thinking about in that ecological graphic, where you're thinking about a forest that hasn't been managed. You really are going to be losing the majority of your trees. You're going to be having an area that looks like the High Park. Whereas when you have an area like, I think Shambhala is a good example of doing thinning, the Cameron Peak did come through there, and they still do have trees, and it is a nice looking place. So I think that that's maybe one avenue, and maybe some of those local site examples could be a good place. I saw some, Jared, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm not an ecologist. I look at the fire aspect, but part of that, yes, folks want to save the trees, and the common perception that I've run into is people like, well, I don't want to clear cut my property. And I think some of the pictures that were shown here and the whole idea of thinning from below, getting out that regen, it does make for a healthier forest stand that is more resistant to insects and disease overall. So if they can still have their nice large mature trees, maybe a couple clumps here and there of, some younger trees, because after 500 years, the forest is probably going to die. So you need some new stuff coming up after that. Yeah, and I think that's the perception is you don't have, people are afraid they're going to have to clear cut, whereas it's been proven in other areas. You thin from beneath, it opens things up, you get the grasses come in, you get more wildlife, which some of the folks that I've talked to around here, who've done some of that thinning from below around their properties for new construction and stuff, they've noticed more deer and other wildlife. It's like, this is really neat, we never saw these before. So I think, it's just, you don't have to clear cut, just start small. And even just a small start protects the neighborhood just that little bit more. And as they see the benefits of some of that thinning, then they take a little bit more. And, you know, it's gonna take time, but eventually we reach that fire resilient community. So, at least that's been my experience talking with folks, that's what I've seen with resistance too, because they think they have to clear cut everything and they don't. So that would be the message to put out, even if it's just start small.
So that's a great question. I love that question because that is probably aside from maybe the cost, that's probably the biggest thing that stops a lot of this work from happening. It's just that perception. So it is a total paradigm shift from what we've done and what we've seen on this landscape for the last 150 years, right? And it's scary cutting trees, or it can be. And you know, for the conservation district and a lot of our other partners here, like going through and explaining that process and some of those ecological benefits, forest health benefits, you know, wildfire benefits, that's kind of our bread and butter. It's really going through and, you know, changing those perceptions, and you're not going to change everyone's mind. But I think a lot of that comes down to just a lack of understanding more than anything. Or, you know, growing up in forest types that you don't really need to manage the same way we need to manage our forest types out here. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different solutions for that. You know, educational events are huge. Just the fact that you all are here, you know, if you're interested in this stuff, there's a lot of resources out there that we can all help point you to, you know, site visits. Some of these partners run different events throughout the year that, you know, we are always looking for more community members to come join. So, you know, one good thing is just keep an eye out, you know, as in your role of some of these events that are coming out, and see if folks will come out and ask those tough questions and take that opportunity to learn. But yeah, it starts here, and you know, every community out here is, you know, it's a slow process, but we're all working towards it. And you know, this coordinating group of partners here that's our main goal, is, you know, changing that perception more than anything else. So.
Okay, another question?
I was gonna add a little bit to that real quick there. Yeah, Gretchen put it perfectly, and I think there are two really good concrete actions you can take. Is one is look for old pictures. I mean, there just weren't as many trees on the landscape 150 years ago. So if you can find some of those old pictures in the Redfeather Historical Society or places like that, that's a really good place to start. Things have changed, and we changed them by removing fire from the landscape. And other factors too, but that was a huge one. And then the other thing we can do is, like Richard said, let's go out and look at this thing. Bob, I'm gonna put you on the spot. You said, hey, let's have a tour, right? Let's go look at those trees. So let's get this entire group out sometime this summer, and we'll go walk through some of those spots where they've brought in the fellow bunches and skidders, some of the spots where they've just brought in chainsaw crews, some of the spots where they've just lit fires on the ground, where they burn those piles, that kind of thing. You can see what they look like immediately after the treatment. You can see what they look like 5 and 10 years later. So those are two really good ways to kind of, you're right, it's a paradigm shift, it's a way of seeing. And part of it is aesthetics, you know, we think about green is pretty, and we see those trees and we see them as pretty, but we have to be able to look at managed landscapes as also worth our time and worth our aesthetic enjoyment. So great question.
Okay, I'll bring, before I give the mic to the next gentleman here, I want to come back to Dan's question. One is that at a local level here, we are prepared to come out and talk about this also. As a matter of fact, I'm coming to the ecology committee next week and present that. So if you have neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, any of us from the fire district, and certainly me or Dan, would be happy to come and talk to you about what we're doing at the local level and kind of how do we get these things down to the ground where we are now. The other thing I want to talk about real quickly, because it goes also to Dan's question, is that you are all up here, we say up on the mountain, right? Pretty much west of Livermore, all the way up through Red Feather, Crystal, out into Poudre Canyon. You're served by 5 fire districts up here. Livermore, Glacier View, Red Feather Lakes, Crystal, and Poudre Canyon. We have a very active, what we call the Northwest Larimer County Fire Chiefs School. We meet twice a month. Matter of fact, we would have met tonight if we weren't here. We've been working together ever since, actually what got us together was the pandemic, believe it or not. When we started having to deal with that, but we meet twice a month. We work with our partners, the Sheriff's Department and Derek and his folks, and the Division of Fire Prevention and Control at the state level. So we do have a lot of that cooperation going already. And one of the things that we've talked about in Glacier View here and with Crystal Lakes is that we hope this is the beginning of the entire mountain up here, because it is something that's more of an area line than collective area. So you all are part of the beginning, part of the story. So.
Ralph Sauer, I'm living in Red Feather Highlands district. And I understand we're extreme for one reason, because we have one road in, one road out. My question is if we could find another, like an emergency exit, like over through the National Forest. You got a 40-acre lot that's land bound, no access to it, right next to Red Feather, between Red Feather Highlands and the Wolf Sanctuary. And how do you get in and out of there? You know, I know there's a road back in through there, and I was wondering if the Forest Service would be up to maybe having a emergency road through there just for emergency exits or not.
I'll let you address that. I just want to address a couple of things there. In terms of the Red Feather Highlands, the evacuation is not the only reason that is an extreme community. There's a lot of other vegetation and fire hazards there. And where evacuation is showing up as extreme in that situation, you're right, we're looking at routing folks out to 74E. And I'll let the Forest Service speak to that, but when we're thinking about evacuations, which the Larimer County Sheriff's Office is going to be the one running that evacuation and making those decisions, probably your best bet is still to be thinking about that 74E route rather than going up into, the forest. But I'll let maybe the Forest Service and maybe LCSO talk a little bit about evacuation options.
Yeah, so on the evacuation side of things, Hyde Park happened before I joined the Forest Service, or before I joined, I used to work for the feds in another life. Hyde Park really taught the Sheriff's Office a lot about evacuations, and I'm sure all of you got very tired in 2020. Please leave. Okay, you can go back. Please leave. We're becoming more and more proactive. So, because during Hyde Park, we were calling for evacuations almost as the fire was reaching people's homes because it was moving so fast. So we're much more proactive now with the idea of we would prefer to give people a full day's notice, if not at least 8 hours notice. One of my jobs and my counterpart's jobs on the Camera Peak, we were mobile lookouts on high points telling our captain, you have 2 days before the fire reaches the management action point where it's time to tell all of you to leave. And then the teams, sometimes whatever team was there didn't want to let people back in. We're dragging around, okay, it's time to let people back in. So like Craig was saying, the evacuation is just one part of the severe conditions up in that area. And on our side, we're gonna get people out well beforehand. Unless it starts right there on a day with 80-mile-per-hour winds. So part of that too is we encourage people, pay attention to the weather, what's going on. If it's a red flag day, have a go bag ready. Don't wait for the call. If you feel, hey, I'm not sure if I should leave or not, grab your go bag and leave. It's always enough if nothing happens. lights. That way, you're going out when the roads are clear, there's not smoke in there, you don't have a bunch of fire people trying to get to your neighborhood at the same time.
Well, I'm talking about like if the fire started on Red River Highlands. I mean, you're talking like an idea of national.
Okay, no, I understand what you're saying there. Yep. So with that, it is one of those, it takes time to get folks up. And that's where we do encourage people, pay attention to the weather, have a go bag ready. And if you see a fire start and you're not sure what you should do, grab the bag and go. So it's gonna take time for folks to get up in there. We've had folks waiting, not evacuating during High Park, but nobody told us it was time to go when the fire was hitting their back wall. So there is I live down in Estes Park. I was technically evacuated a couple times on different things. We all live in the mountains. We assume an inherent risk with doing that. And part of that is being aware of what's going on and being able to make those decisions with that event that starts right next door. Because there is no time. And so do that and get out, being aware. We are going to do our best, but we all have a risk living in the mountains that we have to accept. And then with that is working on that home ignition zone to start building our stuff. Then your neighbor works on theirs, and we start linking. And then the fire behavior is much less. It doesn't move as quickly under general moderate conditions. Some of the days on camera peak were way beyond what we've seen. But we can also just reduce that risk to buy us more time, buy our homes once you have. Does that help? I know it doesn't answer all of your questions. And James may be able to answer some of the stuff from the Forest Service side. But yeah, there are several communities around, not just here, but around the county that are one way in, one way out. And so we try to be very proactive. So with that, it could even be, we have a red flag day, we hear a fire start. We're asking if the fire department is saying, hey, we need to evacuate. We're starting to pull that trigger before people are even getting there.
The reason why I was asking for him on that, he has some ability to get into that 40 acres, so you can go and slam on. They're getting in there, to trim the trees and stuff. And I was wondering if that same access that you have there could be used by our community if the other road was blocked with the fires. Would you be apt to have that road go on the other to the east? It goes out right there by the wolf sanctuary.
Yeah, the specifics, I was on that parcel about 4 years ago. We have an individual agreement with sanctuary to access that. That doesn't get extended to anybody else for the purposes of that mitigation work. As far
Right, we
as,
could talk to them
yeah,
and maybe get that for emergency use if we got your permission too.
yeah, well, so
And you're there.
right, but first of all, personally, I'm not in a position of authority. And secondly, it's all of our lands, right? So the Forest Service has to consider that all US citizens have equal rights to that particular parcel, okay? And rights means the ability to benefit from what that parcel, in this case, it happens to be 40 acres, not 40,000 acres. But that parcel then provides certain benefits to the rest of the American public, whether or not it's water quality, wildlife, habitat, and the like. So in order for us to actually move forward with a proposition like that, it requires us to open that up for public comment, which is much broader. And it would also, as an egress and ingress route, that's the thing, is that the quality of that road needs to be more than just a little 2-track headed out where you could easily, in a smoke-filled environment, end up with jamming up egress. So what you're looking, what you would actually be looking for is an equal caliber of road out of there, if that's the case. And my suggestion is this, so bottom line is no, even locally, we can't authorize that. Because again, this is, it's national forest land, so it belongs to all of the citizens. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is really looking at that primary ingress and egress and making it such that even under some of the most extreme conditions, it's passable. It's wide enough. It's clearly marked, and I'm not the expert on this, but I've been a fire management officer before and dealt with a number of these fires that, the roads that are wide and wider and clear of those flammable materials that create those high intensity flames along the side of the road. If those are mitigated, getting in and out, and then the county being very, very proactive and giving folks time, those are going to be the things that really benefit the community. Because Red Feather Highlands is one of, just as you brought it up, I was thinking about all the other communities. I ran out of fingers and toes that are in similar situations. And it's not just Forest Service, it's also maybe a larger ranch next to them where, so it's just it's a condition we live in this type of topography where the roads are where they are.
Hey, you have a question? Get to the back here.
I can just speak down.
Okay.
I project loudly. Anyway, just maybe kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but are there opportunities for residents in the area to haul their slash into town to remove it? I know Glacier here, we're kind of in a holding pattern as far as our slash piles, our community slash piles. So is there opportunities with the county for residents to be able to bring their slash down either at a discount or, something along those lines?
At this point, not that I'm aware of, because it would just go to the landfill. I know the commissioners have thought about, they have asked where else can we do some of these things. But with that, I would say, I'll close and say, call your commissioners and lobby for that. It would be a great idea. It's where do we put it? Where is the place to take that?
Is that something that we can, once this document is approved, that we can start, arguing that point a bit?
It could be. You could probably even do it right now. We don't have, Boulder County has a very robust program, but their program is also tax-based. People pay taxes specifically for some of the fuels mitigation stuff that goes on in that county. We do not have a tax base for that, so it would be coming up with funding to run a slash collection yard slash store yard. So, yeah, it could be talking to the commissioners, looking at the feasibility of that. And I'll just be honest, as far as I know, they're going to have to balance the budget for that, where to put it, most bang for the buck. And you bring up the biggest thing is, what do we do with all this stuff? Unfortunately, right now, I don't have an answer for you, aside from either pile burning, chipping and mulching, or taking it down to the landfill. I know there's some of the larger burn piles that you guys have as a community have done. Looking at the weather, we're hoping I'm gonna be able to get my folks up here Monday or Tuesday to take care of at least one or two more of those. It all depends on what the snow brings. So we're trying to help as best we can. But yeah, community sort yard would be great. It's the way our county is set up, there is no tax base to help run something like that. That, I know it doesn't help, but does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, I was just saying, I don't trust my neighbors not to do their own pile burning. I love them, but I just don't have that much faith in that. And just kind of trying to cater to the lowest common denominator.
Right, yeah.
That's why I was. So it sounds like it's just gonna have to be a very.
Or you have another-
Quick compliment, thanks for supporting the burning of our slash piles.
Oh, you're very welcome, and we're happy to do it, and we're also getting more folks trained up to be burn boss threes, which are call bosses, so once we get more folks, we can actually start splitting and hopefully do more of these in the future.
I'd like to also comment on that real quick. We as the fire district are aware of this issue of Glacier with the slash piles. And we've been trying to come up with a solution for it. We've been working with the homeowner association with GDM. I think Don isn't here tonight. Oh, he is back there. And I believe you're applying for one of the grants, I think, aren't you?
I did,
At the county.
was Sunday, and we'll wait and see.
So we are aware of that issue. And it's taken a few years to get where we are today, and it may take a little bit of time to get there. But it's just like you mentioned, there's that balancing of risk versus benefit. And I gotta tell you, it's been very difficult over the last couple of years because of the air quality issues of burning. We're getting the air quality conditions lined up with the snow conditions lined up with the availability of people to do it, which has been great with the county this year. They've been able to provide personnel resources when those windows come up, which we can as volunteers. So we understand that that's an issue. We understand, and we're really going to be working that real hard as part of this process.
Gentlemen in the.
I also, thank you all for being out here supporting community. We survived the High Park fire. We just moved in a month before it. In fact, the Gila Gulch fire was going while we were moving in. It's really sad being from the 12th filing to see that we're still under high risk. And I'm a little bit disappointed that we don't have some county representation other than the sheriff's department, because we've got some things going on. Those of you who've been back in the 12th filing realize, in fact, some of the geezers refer to us as the ghetto back there. Because after the fire came through, all of our lots sold for dirt cheap. Some of them sold for $5,000–6,000. And so we ended up with permanent campers back there with wood burning stoves inside of their campers. They stay there. They're not covered under the building permits. So they don't have to have smoker or spark arresters on their fireplaces. It's an accident waiting to happen. We had 91-mile-an-hour winds the other day back in the 12th fire. All it's going to take, I had a next door neighbor that was burning. I could see flames shooting out the top like that. So that's something that needs to be addressed somewhere along the line. And our fire department did check it out. There is no regulations on it.
That's an interesting problem. We'll take note of that and maybe be able to make mention of that in the document, that should be an action item.
So tonight, I've heard a lot of good work from the Ember Alliance, putting together the CWPP. Heard about a lot of good organizations that have experience, expertise, resources. Does the CWPP end with identifying the risk and prioritizing? And then is the next step to address those risks with the resources we heard about?
Bingo. Yes. The CWPP identifies risks, identifies priorities at that built environment, all the way up to the landscape scale. And what we're hoping that you take away tonight is some methods to how to address those priority areas for implementation and some of the programs that could help you do it. Also, to encourage you all that it is on all of these partners, on your fire protection district, and on you to all work cohesively to do your piece of the puzzle to make this community better.
Because right now I don't see the cohesive part. I mean, should individual homeowners contact resources? Should we work through our HOAs, through their fire districts? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, should I take five phone numbers tonight and contact these people?
All of the above. All of the above, yes. So yes, individual homeowners need to be taking action. You need to be thinking about your home, construction materials, home hardening, working on that home ignition zone into the defensible space. Also, you need to be working with your HOA or what other sort of community organization you might have. At one of the last meetings, somebody came up to me and said, I hate you, you're making me talk to my neighbors. I don't want to talk to my neighbors. But that's what I'm saying. You need to go talk to your neighbors about doing this work at a cohesive level. There's recommendations in the document about what type of actions to be doing at that scale. But that's something that you and everyone in this room needs to be moving forward. We can't move that forward for you. The fire district can't move that for you, and really none of these partners can move that for you, forward for you. However, they can provide a lot of resources, recommendations, they can connect the dots. You know, Daniel Bowker was talking a lot about different homeowners seeing work being done and having that mitigation work start to move. So it's all of the above. It's getting phone numbers, making contacts. You all have to be the kind of change makers in your community because no one's going to do it for you. There's a lot of resources to help you, but you do have to bring it forward as well and figure out what's the cohesiveness, what's the community building that I can do, what makes sense. And I don't know that for everybody's situation in here, but it is something that we want to provide you all the resources and support in the world to do, but we need to have some community engagement and creative thinking, problem solving as well. You want to add to that?
I'll add just a little bit to that. I mean, that's a great practical question, right? How do we start? How many lots do we have in Glacier? 1,000, 1,200, 1,600?
900.
900, all right. So we don't start with 900s of lots. We start thinking about those spots. I talked to Ted Timmons about a spot where he's got some neighbors that are already doing some mitigation. So if you know 4 or 5 folks that are on board with this, that are interested with this kind of idea, you know, it's hard to do anything on, well, an individual homeowner can do something on a half acre or an acre or 2 acres. It's hard for an organization like ours to do much on one small parcel. But if we had a group of 5 parcels or 10 parcels or something like that, then we're getting to the scale where we can think about, hey, this is a good, you know, there are several different types of grants that Forest Service has, that the county has, that we can think about scale. And think about, okay, we've got 6 parcels over here representing 30 acres. That sounds like a project. Let's start looking at maps and start identifying the grant opportunity that might fit there. So it's a little bit at a time. You know, this is going to give you that large scale overview of where things need to happen. If you live in one of those areas where things need to happen, like you said, grab some neighbors, start talking about it, and think about, you know, putting together some of those parcels. Reach out to any one of us. We can all send you to the right spot based on the scale of that potential project. We'll see what we can put together. But that's, you know, that's a great practical question for sure.
And I have something quick to add with the question that the gentleman in front asked at the beginning here. John Parker, who is the site manager who couldn't be here in person tonight, who manages the DU campus, had some thoughts about a potential opportunity for DU to connect with the Red Feather Highlands. And we can do that offline. We don't need to hash that out right now, but that is exactly kind of the purpose of this, is trying to identify if there's any connection points. So that is one example.
Okay, before I hand this off to the next person here, I want to give an opportunity for Dan Knox, the fire chief, to tell you about a new program that we're going to start pretty soon. That would be an opportunity for some of you to help us in a collective way.
Yeah, so I've been chief now for 4 months, full time. So I was acting chief there for 6 months last year and kind of rolled right into it this winter. So some things that we're looking at, we're really looking at pushing forward and trying to incorporate the CWPP into some more of our fire department stuff. that we're doing. We're looking at doing some community projects with it this year. And then we're also gonna be looking at doing some other community projects. And in order to do that, we're looking to put together a support group, which a lot of the fire departments up around here have. We haven't had one for years, so we're working right now on getting something like that together. More of a behind the scenes thing to help out with events. You know, like we'll be doing Firewise later on this summer, some stuff like that. So shameless plug. If anybody's interested, you know, feel free to give us a contact us. We'll probably start going here in the next month or so. We'll have details coming out here later on this month. So, but we'll be looking at doing some more community stuff, like maybe possibly some first aid CPR stuff. We've got people who can be instructors to do that kind of stuff now up here. And we're starting to look going ahead with the CWPP and the fire department and the HOA. I know the pile burning has been a really big thing. One, like you said, one of the big issues with that is the regulations, and our permits have to be just right. That's where Larimer County, they really stepped up and they're really helping us. We were actually one of the few volunteer fire departments that did our own pile burning in the state of Colorado up until this year. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of our thing, but now we realize that we can't do it ourselves, and it's been great. We love working with the wildland guys. So, you know, we go out in the system and then we watch the, once it gets down, and we do all the mop up and watch it for the next couple of days. So, so we are still working on that. We'll keep working on that with the HOA, because I know that's been kind of a contention with everybody. But we're not just dropping the ball on it. We are still going for it. So, so yeah, keep your eyes open. Facebook page and next door. We'll be putting some stuff out. If anybody's interested, you know, we would love to have you jump on. So.
Thanks, Dan.
Michael O'Neill. I want to follow up on the question back here and make sure that I understand. It seems like the Glacier View Fire Protection District took the initiative to pull all together this whole entire process here. Am I correct in that? So there's some real leadership, coordination, focus. A lot of work went into getting to where we are right now. What I'm hearing right now is essentially, it feels to me like it's being dumped, fragmented on 100 people now, and being told, now it's yours, go do it. I'm not sure how anything happens without leadership, coordination, resources. I can tell you right now, nothing's going to happen. You know that yourself. We're all going to take a look at what there is to be done. We're going to take a look maybe at this report that comes out, and then it's going to die. Seems to me that what's really needed, if this is going to be taken seriously, is some kind of coordination and leadership to say, okay, this is what we have now. What do? Pulling together a group of people, organizing resources, taking a look at a plan, coming up with a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, some kind of something. Otherwise, if I'm understanding correctly, you're finishing your job with a written report. And that's what we have, a written report.
So what are some ways that the community could begin to organize itself and coordinate with the fire protection district?
That's what sounds to me like. Is that part of your written report then? Is a recommendation that a coordinating group be developed in the community with some sort of specific recommendation on how to go about doing that or what to do?
Yeah, so that is the support group that the chief was mentioning. And another recommendation that we have that I can't say how it will move forward is what we were mentioning before, in coordination and pooling resources between the districts in this area, whether it's just Crystal Lakes, Red Feather, and Glacier View, or that includes Livermore and Clear Canyon, like Warren was mentioning in that Northwestern Chiefs group. We wonder if there's an opportunity to pool resources. So the recommendation is indeed for the fire district to begin working to create those community networks and to support them in the form of that support group that they're beginning. And that's a new effort. And I think that that will be a good way for community organizations to move forward. We also have had meetings with community leaders from your organizations, HOA presidents, to share these findings and talk a little bit about what some of the challenges are here. And so in other communities, some things that have worked where they have a paid fire department staff and they have a lot of time to dedicate to these things are they have community ambassador programs where each community has a leader that coordinates with the fire district. In this case, the fire district is entirely volunteer, and so we're trying to think about ways in which the community can be organized and volunteer some time with the district because there isn't as much staff capacity. So there's some unique challenges there. I don't know, Warren, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I've worked in local government my entire career. And I've certainly been part of planning efforts that ended up with a document on the shelf that we look at 10 years later and go, we spent $10,000 for that X. I think that's always a challenge, is how do we move into implementation? And I know that when I make presentations to our board of directors every month, I see some of them here, that's always their first question, is how are we going to implement this? How are we going to make it work? How are we going to sustain it in the future? And that is, that's a challenge. But it's a challenge that's worth taking on because the actions that we have to take in the future to live in a fire adapted environment, we've got to do those things. And I know that our district, is committed to doing what we can to make those things happen within the context of obviously as a volunteer group. And I would imagine that I'll be staying involved with this at some level. But we're going to be asking for help to do that. Maybe some of you here to help us do that, especially within the HOA group, so that we put together those networks to make those things happen. I've been working with all these folks up here in the last 6 months and developing those networks so that when we develop networks further out, that we have those contacts and those resources to work with. It's not an easy task. It's a lot of work, but it's work that is worth doing. And I look around and I can see some of our board of directors here. And I think I speak for them that they're committed to serving our community. And when I talk about our community, everybody within our 56 square mile fire districts, within the 7 organized HOA organizations to make those things happen. I still got a few years to go yet. And I expect that's where I'm going to be spending those few years to go. So I appreciate the comment, but I do know what the challenge is. And we all do.
So we're a little bit after 9. Maybe we'll do a last question here, and then we'll probably want to wrap it up to respect everyone's time. But I think we'll all be here for a few moments if you want to ask any additional questions. But let's have this be the last one.
I was just going to add, at the meeting we had of this 2 weeks ago, when we got to this point, I kind of felt the same thing Michael did, was a sense to put this in place is really going to require task force, whatever you want to call it, that would fall into the category in our situation of volunteers. I was told, well, you're willing to volunteer for it. I guess putting it into a question tonight, is any of the support partners, grant money, etc., capable or have active access funding to perhaps have a paid person that would follow up with the CWPP in the area and contact homeowners and coordinate a task force or something, instead of placing it on maybe this is purely a volunteer organization.
Or if I know off the top of my head of a funding resource that would support a paid position to do that, However, that was one of the things that we definitely identified as a unique challenge for not only really just Glacier View, but the other volunteer districts that are up this way. And that was where that thought that potentially there might be a benefit to pooling some resources. I can't say that that is going to materialize, but I think that that would be maybe a potential way to pool funding in the region, where each individual district may not be able to put forward a paid position to do that, but maybe there would be one paid position for the region.
I guess maybe to be a little more specific in my question was, I hear about the grant money, et cetera. Could it be part of that grant task? I mean, is it just gonna be for equipment or et cetera, or would it be to help? I mean, could it somehow be blended into the grant?
I can take on that real quick. So, I guess the Larimer Conservation District and CPRW, we kind of work at those different scales, but do that exact thing that you're mentioning. So, you know, what we do is we go out and say you give us a call, right? Call Daniel up and say, hey, I would like you to come out to my property and have a look, and let's talk about what some of my options are. Then you guys have that conversation, and then, you know, what happens then is you start talking to your neighbors, right? And that's the best way to get this work done, is community based. So it works so much better to have, you know, folks in the community that are talking to neighbors where you already have those relationships to get that ball rolling. And then, you know, working with an organization, we can help prioritize where those acres are treated and talk about some of the alternatives for treatment. And, you know, it's a snowball. Like, we both have extensive experience in working in HOAs where, you know, you start with maybe one landowner. And then, you know, next year you get maybe 4 or 5 landowners that say, oh, I saw what you did on Ted's property over there, I'd like to become involved. And then it just keeps building off of that. So that's one way you can access or tap into some of the resources that are available without having a
You've
specific
got
person.
excellent people here and excellent partners and resources to do that. I think if I understood Michael and myself, it's that promotion to the neighborhood. And as somebody else shared, I don't want to talk to my neighbor. You know, it sounds great that one person will do it, the next person will do it. It doesn't always happen that way, but you might be able to have someone that took the ball and carried it from here so that it doesn't just die after the report is printed. And to be able to call you then and say, we promoted it, this person's interested in doing something, we need your expertise.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we can step in. Yeah, that's exactly like Christian said, that's exactly where we can step in. So, you know, if you're interested, let's talk. And then let's look at the map, let's see who your neighbors are. Excuse me, for another kind of practical example, you know, the group of neighbors is a good one. But I've seen road and rec organizations and those kind of entities, they'll come up with a subcommittee, they'll say, hey, let's, you know, we got 20 grand. It's sitting in the bank, let's do 10 acres. Let's do it on one of our green belts or something like that. That's a really good way to get projects started. And then people get interested, those neighbors see the work and that kind of thing. And then another part of the structure is just going out and seeing the treatments and getting people interested. So, you know, Gretchen and I both do have capacity for that. Luckily, we have organizations and donors and folks that are interested in us doing this kind of work. So if you give us a call, we can come out and we can take a look and we can start that mapping process and we can figure out what's appropriate and how to put those things together. So I totally understand. The last 3 questions are really getting at the heart of what we're talking about here, right? So yeah, we got this document. How do we put it into action? And it'll take a while, and it'll take some self-organization and that kind of thing, but we can definitely help with a lot of that. And if you got a good idea, we can take it to fruition in pretty short. Now, again, we can't start at the top. You know, we're gonna have to kind of start at the bottom and find those areas that are ready to go. And I think there's some projects. Great questions. Thanks, Greg.
I think, Karina, we're gonna try to wrap it up.
Yeah, I got one. So the CWPP plan does not just die on somebody's shelf, because it's utilized actually by all of us, including the Forest Service, to help focus on prioritization projects as we move forward. So it's really up to the entity, whether or not it's a Glacier View homeowner, which I was presently for, or previously, excuse me, for 12 years, lived up in Glacier View. The onus is on the homeowner. Do the work on the homeowner's land with the help of this group. And we will be working together to find ways to try and support. But just like you have a road maintenance crew and equipment, it depends on, how the community places an emphasis on the need for wildfire risk reduction. It's real. If Glacier View has one lesson to walk away from the last 10 years of wildfire, it happens, and it happens more frequently than we all want it to. So this plan will not die. It will be used by all of us. And we are here to provide as much support, but if it's not gaining enough steam, those are some questions internally as a community you should be asking yourselves. Do we need to stand up a position and put something in place to drive this more quickly, because we're running out of space and time. We are, okay, it's just a reality. So I don't want to end this with, that it will die, because it won't. And you'll see, that engagement is really what brings people together, gets people talking, and makes work happen.
So I want to wrap it up here. Thank you all for the great questions. John Parker from the University of Denver, who's the site manager here, wants to thank you all so much for coming out and enjoying the facilities. We're going to wrap it up here. I think we'll be around for a few minutes if you have any more burning questions that we didn't have time for today. But I wanted to say thank you so much for coming out. This has been one of the best attended and some of the best and hardest questions that we've been asked. So I really appreciate the engagement. Thank you all.
One other thing is leaving. I know that we have